All righty. Well, I know that we have a packed night tonight, so I am not going to waste any more time. My name is Grace. I am CodePink's engagement manager. I am so thankful for all of you joining us tonight. Have joined us every night through our Palestine weeks, our China weeks. We are in the midst of our anti-imperialist campaign action weeks. These are designed to go deeper with each of our CodePink campaigns to learn more about the people behind the movements and how all of our liberation work is connected to Palestine, to making peace with China, and to making peace with our beautiful planet. As I said, thank you so much for those who have stuck around with us through all the weeks that we have had. We've had some amazing webinars, calls to action at events throughout the past few weeks. If you have missed any of those webinars, calling parties, or didn't grab the several links and resources online, I will be sending a one-stop shop where you can sign up for all of the past action weeks. You can sign up for all of our current actions happening during our War is Not Green weeks, and you can receive all future invites as well. So stick around throughout this hour to hear about what we're doing this week, to hear about War is Not Green, and to hear what we have in store. But I'm going to quickly go over the norms that we do for all of our in-person, online, virtual programming, and then I'm going to pass it to Jody and Aaron to get us started with War is Not Green. But as always, we ask you to please be respectful. This isn't a debate, but a discussion. We are not here to mediate arguments. We're here to learn from each other, to be kind, be curious, be ready to take action, as always, and to please, above all else, please stay muted. We use these webinars, virtual programmings for radio shows, for future resources for other people who might not be able to join us. So please, if you could put your thoughts, questions, ideas in the chat, we will try to get to them tonight. If not, we will try to get to them throughout these amazing 2 weeks we have ahead of us. So I'm going to pass it over to Jody and Aaron and get the night started.
So, hi everyone. Seems like I'm frozen. I just want to welcome everyone. And I'm so excited that you're here and that you want to learn more about the War is Not Green campaign at CodePink. I just have the deepest gratitude for all of you and what you do and how you engage. And I see many familiar faces here that I've been in the streets with for a very long time. And that we're doing this series because it's really important for us to understand the strategies that we're engaged with, what these campaigns intend to do, because it's all about building a movement. And how we build a movement is to meet people where they are and pull them off of the war economy, pull them off of the propaganda that has been layered on them, and to give them the tools and you the tools to build for the changes that we need and that are necessary. So I think Erin's going to start us off by sharing our PowerPoint, but Erin runs this campaign, and I started it 23 years ago. So together we're going to try to keep it moving, keep you educated, and hopefully inspire you to engage in our current campaign. Today is really mostly about like the deeper 101 of this campaign. And then next week, we'll take you more into how to engage right now. So there is an elephant in the room of war and the work to, for climate change, the work to save the planet. And it's why 23 years ago, we started our campaign at CodePink, War is Not Green. It started with our first trip to Iraq before the invasion. We saw the devastation to the agriculture region from the first Gulf War, and the devastation that we heard from farmers, how they were no longer able to grow their crops, what it had done to the entire ecosystem, not just the soil, but it had totally distorted the ecosystem, and also the deformity from the babies that were being born there. And this goes back 23 years. We were able to meet with different people from the agriculture movement and the doctors in the hospitals to learn about this. So it's part of CodePink since we started. Iraq, where we were, was the Fertile Crescent. They say the birthplace of humanity between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And there we were watching really the destruction of humanity happening there, which was not lost on us. So throughout these 22 years, we've been addressing this issue and shining a light on it. We make the connections in relation to Palestine and Venezuela and the US desire to go to war on China and Ukraine. This is to help expand the movement to those who have a passion for the planet and a work to end the effects of the climate chaos. So our work, as always, is to educate, inspire, and activate to build a movement that will end the war economy and the wars that serve it. Power gives up power only when we hold it responsible and accountable, and we build enough of a fight to force it to behave to our needs instead of us to theirs. So we all know that to end war, we must build a movement, and that's very hard, I know, for everyone when you are watching the devastation and the violence daily. And yet we come back to, how do we find more? How do we build? How do we educate? How do we take people out of the stupidity layered on them? And, just a quick reminder that we can't end war until we end the war economy, because war serves the war economy, the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy, killing you, your community, and the planet. Just a little commercial from the Local Peace Economy Project. So to have conversations with people, we need to start at their values. We connect, we're relational. We start where they are, and then we give them information that has been hidden from them or denied them, or where they're working on lies. So for many, many years, we've worked with our coalition partners to build campaigns across the peace movement. And I would say what's really exciting over the last 7, 8 years and up to the last few years is every coalition partner really has a campaign where they're building, because we need to teach inside our own movements, right? So every one of our coalition partners, our anti-war coalition partners, our peace coalition partners, has built a campaign inside their organization where they're teaching inside of their community. And that's a huge success, and that's taken quite a while to do. Another big success is that we've been able to move in some places those in the climate movement to take this on. And we, having a team of organizations in the anti-war movement pushing this agenda is meaningful. That's why this is your 101 on the war is not green, just like they're having the same in their organizations. War, as we know, is an overwhelming in its breadth of destruction to life and the planet. So on the next slide, we're going to look, why this matters and, what's hidden from you. Well, we talk a lot about the cost of war, right? The cost in dollars, but your tax dollars are paying to kill you and the possibility of a future of life on the planet. I know that's a horrifying statement, but just like, for the last 20 years, we've talked about the effects of funding militarism and how it would create a culture of fascism and turn weapons on the people in the United States. This too is inevitable without the people standing in the way of it. So I just want to speak to the gravity. We've been doing this for 23 years. We've talked about when you keep funding the Pentagon and making the rich richer, it will eventually be turned at you. But I want to say the cost to the planet of these wars is turned on you every day. So out of COP, the Committee of the Peoples, which is the group around the world that come together to address climate change. When it was in Paris, it came up with the Paris Agreement. We've heard that, Trump has pulled himself out of it. But when they wrote the Paris Agreement, the United States, to sign it, insisted that the cost of war not be measured in numbers. They insisted. So, you know when something's devastating and that you probably should know it is when they try to hide it from you. So let's just understand like how devastating this must be, because they wouldn't even sign the Paris Accords and this until this was included. So even as war is the greatest um, industrial polluter. I don't think I needed numbers to know the cost of war to the planet. I mean, I naively thought obvious to everyone. But one of my friends and fellow anti-war activists I've been in the streets with, Paul Hawken, wrote a book called Drawdown. It's 100 ways to draw down carbon, and ending war was not included. I was outraged, screaming at him, like, how the hell could he write a book and be my friend and not have war in it? And he said, well, one of the criteria in writing the book is there had to be a study, that we didn't know everything. So we just looked to studies and compared them and figured out, what were the 100 ways. And there was no study on the cost of war to the planet. Whoa. So we turned to our friends at the Cost of War Project at Brown University. By the way, what a gift on the planet. Always a place to go when you need numbers. Led by Netta Crawford, and she did the study. It was a bombshell. It was felt around the world because these numbers were secret. And not only that, they try to keep them secret. So she really had to analyze, find her way through the back door of figuring out what these numbers should be. And those numbers came out around COP in Glasgow. We took our War is Not Green stickers to Glasgow, and we're marching with 100,000 people in the streets. And I would ask before handing out the sticker, did you know that war is the greatest industrial polluter to the planet? Now, these are 100,000 climate activists, right? These are activists. Not a one said yes. When I gave them the sticker, they were gladly to take it in. But I was shocked at how secret this information was. So you can understand, like, that's 4 years ago. You can understand, like, how important this information is and that it was hidden on purpose. So when we say we're bringing the elephant in the room visible, or we're shining a light on it for the climate movement, it's a real thing. It's a really tangible thing that is necessary for change to happen and for us to bring in this movement, which you'll hear a lot more about our campaign next Monday when we take it deeper. But I'm just giving you the historical context that led to this. So from the COPs, we've moved deeper and deeper in with the issue, with the coalition of partners that have really been taking this on. And from Glasgow, we moved it to outside. We moved it to having a group inside, not on a public agenda, but in the halls. And this upcoming COP in Brazil, there will actually be a session in COP about it. Now, that's, actually getting people to say that it exists, say that is a problem. You have to understand that's a big step. And when we talk about how do we move the issues forward, we're doing this to let you know this has been happening and we've moved and we've been successful. So I find this one of our most successful campaigns in really infiltrating the places where the war machine and the military industrial complex and the warmongers don't want this information known. So just a reminder that this work matters and we are moving this ball forward. And that's why it's so important that we want you to engage with us as we move to the next step. So another example of moving the ball forward is Climate Week. Has been happening in New York City for 15 years. And recently they finally, the activist groups, both peace and climate groups, decided to call it Peace and Climate Justice Week. Huge victory of just getting peace in the conversation. So with our, activism across the climate movement and engaging with some of our friends in the climate movement, that was another big step. So I think we're still back on the other slide, but I'll just move ahead. The other thing I just wanted to say from the other slide is that it's more than money. This is about life. Why they try to hide these numbers of all the ways they work to get away with murder. it's like the murder of the people, and it's the murder of the earth, which is the murder of all of us, because if there is no life on the planet, we're dead, right? And these nuclear weapons that they're planning to use on China, these nuclear weapons that they're still funding, this is no joke. This is a climate change that's inarticulable. So just a reminder that when these weapons are used over there, it's happening to all of us. The balance of the planet affects all the ways we live and are immeasurable, and are deeply felt, by those who have the least. I want to say they're the ones that pay the greatest costs. So it's another way that the war economy is inhumane to those with the least. So the war on terror, yes, it cost taxpayers $22 trillion. Almost 5 million people's lives are lost because of it. But the balance of nature is hard to articulate because it has affected the whole world with the climate change effects of that $22 trillion and those 20 years of war. That amount of money was spent on destruction, and then the amount that was then to attend to the disruption and what needed to be spent to bring things back. Imagine if that amount of money was spent on the needs of the people, on the development of the web of life, and the care of all of us for a future. So I just want you to imagine that. So then the history. We've been engaged with this campaign in many ways. Back in the aughts, we were going to different places where they were building these 800 bases that the US military has around the world. And I don't know why, but they always pick pristine ecosystems. And in Italy, like going to the places where literally they were paradises that were being destroyed by the US military to build a base. Italy was one of our first. We went to the Jeju Island in Korea, also another pristine paradise ecosystem. And all the ways that the horrific destruction of ecosystem that is happening in the Asia Pacific as the US prepares to go to war on China, heartbreaking, but particularly with our friends in Guam and the Mariana Islands who join us at COP every year to bring their horror stories to share to those that are attending COP, whether it's inside or outside. We also spent a year post-Katrina in New Orleans, helping to rebuild the communities in New Orleans and working with Common Ground. We had a beautiful peace garden to model the care for the planet instead of destruction. We were in the streets and getting arrested to address the violence of Keystone XL, Dakota Access, and Line 3 pipelines, both to expose the violence to the planet, but also the insane violence to the people and the use of weapons of war against those putting their bodies on the line to stop them. The war inside did not just start with Trump's declaration to the generals last week. It's been happening, as we also saw when we went to Ferguson. So the next slide we'll move to is a resource imperialism. And before Aaron takes us into all the numbers and takes us into the juiciness of this, I want to say that it's always really good. We say we stand on facts. We stand on what's really happening, just like tomorrow is October 7th. But we know October 7th isn't what it's about. It's about 100 years of creating a culture of imperialist colonialism and Zionism. But those are words, but also it's important to remember that UK and US created Israel on the lands of the Palestinian people because what was happening in the Middle East and North Africa was powerful. A powerful people's movement was growing and it had amazing leadership. And those leaders were murdered. Hundreds of thousands murdered. And they saw Israel placing it there as the pivot point here in the center of Europe, Asia, Africa, resource extraction. They saw the importance of doing this. So let us also look at this from this lens of, war is not green, of the resource extraction that is at the root of imperialism and colonialism. And that, resources are going to be extracted because we are living in a world where most of what we use needs a resource. But there's no need for resource imperialism and violence to be accompanied. And the building of and control and usurping of power across the world. And just to speak to this moment in history, it's quite important for us to remember that why Israel was created, why in Palestine, and why that matters as we talk about wars not green and resource extraction and violence. You know, what was happening in the Middle East and North Africa was a socialist movement. A lot because, like with China, the Middle East is a socialist culture. And, in Iran, we couped the democratically elected leader who was a socialist because he was sharing the profits of the oil with the people. Iraq, Saddam was sharing the profits from the oil with the people, and it was a socialist society. Libya, a socialist society where the profits of the oil shared with the people. So as we move into Aaron's amazing presentation, stand on the shoulders of this and then how it plays out in history. So thank you, Aaron, for take it away.
Thank you so much, Jody. Really appreciate you delving into that history, and I think really just getting to the concept of and the core of what we are fighting for and really trying to do, which is build a united movement that prioritizes life. And so, there are so many numbers that we'll be diving into and so many both horrific and inspiring details of things, but we really wanted to start with what the relationship that we're talking about here is. And Jody gave it an incredible intro, but we're talking about the relationship between the climate crisis, extraction, and the war economy. And resource extraction is what drives the climate crisis. And so that's the burning of fossil fuels, the using of water, destroying ecosystems and biodiversity that maintain the balance of all of this. And what we're saying here is that war is what maintains it in its current form and is also what the result of an endless drive for exploiting the wealth and the sovereignty of countries around the world. And so extraction is exactly what imperialism is. If we think of imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, when capitalism and markets expand beyond the market of one country to make profit from the resources extracted elsewhere. And so, like Jody was saying, that's not to say that without capitalism or without war, there wouldn't be any extraction, but the wars and the invasions and the occupations that are carried out for oil, what that's done is leave a really deadly path that only makes Western executives and billionaires richer, makes war profiteers more profitable, and forces countries to continue being put in this position. And it also makes any transition to a regenerative economy and green energy more and more difficult. And so when we're talking about extraction, that's everything that's listed here and that we've been talking about. So that's oil for fossil fuels, that's so-called critical minerals. And we just did an amazing webinar on this where I learned so much, but critical minerals that are being used for so-called green technology, for batteries, for military weapons. These are minerals that in different points in history have been given different terminology depending on where Western political and economic interests are. But when we talk about green technology, we can't have green technology that decimates an entire country in order to get it. And that destroys the water quality, that kills millions. And so we need to really evaluate what we're talking about when we're thinking about green technology and when we're thinking about what it's done to the Congo or the coups that have been attempted in Bolivia. Or now, I'll talk about this Alliance of Sahel states, but there's increasingly more attacks basically happening to any country that tries to chart its own future on its own path. And so whether it's continuous sanctions on Iran, the destabilization of Syria, and sanctions until recently when the more Western and Israeli friendly government took power. Whether it's any of this, we need to understand resource extraction, oil, mining, building up war as the main interest here. And so and you can chart that from the start of mining in the Congo, which was initially exploited for uranium during nuclear buildup. And since then, it's been subject to intervention after intervention, often Western backed and for the sake of continued mining. And it's killed millions, destroyed the country, and created extreme environmental disaster. And so these are all what we need to be thinking of at the top of our minds when we think about how the fossil economy is continued and how the extractive economy is continued. So I mentioned the Sahel, and for those unfamiliar, there in recent years has been a series of revolutions and uprisings that started with the building of a new Pan-Africanism and a new form of sovereignty on the continent. And one of the ways that that's happened after these new governments have taken power have been the nationalization of resources so that they can actually benefit the people there. In Burkina Faso, gold has been nationalized. In Niger, uranium, which also the uranium that comes from Niger accounts for a huge portion of Europe's energy production as a whole and electricity. And immediately after so a lot of these changes started to take place, people like Michael Langley, who is who's the head of AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, which were part of a longstanding campaign to shut down. He started making accusations about the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, around using gold for his own interest. And in reality, of course, we say that every accusation is a confession because what's being lost here for the U.S. is control over the private market that has allowed it to make money from this extraction. And it's losing control over a region that it's tried to intervene in and has only brought more violence to. And so stopping extraction and stopping the resource imperialism that tries to destabilize these countries for U.S. interests needs to be a key priority of any movement that claims to stand for a regenerative economy. And so that's a big part of what we're saying here. Another factor, you can chart this across the world. I talked about the Congo, and I think for anyone who's been engaged in the fight to stop the genocide and for a liberated Palestine, we also can understand Palestine, in addition to the struggles for Palestinians to maintain their own land and sovereignty and have full liberation and right of return. It's also about the U.S. interests for why it continues to back Israel and continues to have an interest in the region, and that's to have a proxy state in an oil-rich region where it can be an extension of Western powers. And you can, go back into every instance of touchstones in where U.S. interests and expansion of colonialism in the region shows its head. But there's the Biden quote of that if we didn't have an Israel, we'd have to create one. And a large part of that is around the region, is around the resource extraction. When it comes to Venezuela, which many of us might have seen some of the increasing threats against the country and threatening invasion and war, bombing around over now, I think 21 people off the coast of Venezuela in boats. this is happening because of targeting the largest oil reserves in the world and the refusal to cooperate with the US. It's building its own system. It's traded in the past with Palestine, with Cuba, and with other countries trying to chart their own path. And it has used oil and survived off of an oil-based economy. And that's because it's forced to by the blockade. And when one resource gives wealth for the country, it's a big part of what's needed. And so, but at the same time, what the blockade and the sanctions have forced and created is a system where infrastructure has been really difficult to maintain. And that, of course, has implications when it comes to maintaining oil pipelines and the environmental destruction that that wreaks. And so, once again, sort of another reason that it is absolutely critical to stand against sanctions and for sovereignty is for the people of Venezuela to chart their own path and have a world and a country where they can have where their energy systems, their economic systems, and political systems are able to live free from US dominance. And this is beyond Venezuela. It's about increasing overreach in the region. And I'm right now just going to pivot to hearing a little bit about this from the beast's own words of the U.S. military. I'll show a clip briefly of Laura Richardson, who is the former director of the U.S. Southern Command, talking really openly about resources being the primary motivation for intervention in the region.
If I talk to my number two adversary in the region, Russia, I mean, I've got, of course, the countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with Russia relationships. But why this region matters, with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well with oil, copper, gold. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have the 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too. I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security, and we need to step up our game.
So I think that pretty much says it. I mean, anytime you really want to get a handle on what the actual interests of US empire are, you can sometimes just listen to them. Often, they'll be trying to hide it behind certain rhetoric, like you see with Langley and resource extraction, but sometimes they just say it. And this is one of those cases. So the more that I learn about the scope of US bases, the more it just consistently blows my mind. We have over 800 in 80 countries on every continent in the world, and we account for 90% of all foreign bases in the world. Once again, 880 countries, and that's only the ones that we know of, because we have an entire network of unofficial, quote unquote, bases that you can track. One that we have a campaign around right now is Cyprus, which has been used for a lot of surveillance flights over Gaza. And that they're also littered across Latin America, around the African continent. And so, again, 90% of all foreign bases in the world. So that's to say that of all the countries in the world that have a base in another country, we're 90% of those. And each one of those, of course, is their own horrific story. Many are known to have PFAS contamination. That's a carcinogenic chemical that's found in tons of US bases around the world, and also around in our, I think, around 750 within the US. One of the most notable examples of environmental disaster that's happened recently is in Red Hill in Hawaii, which is a storage facility near the Pearl Harbor base. And in 2021, there was a jet leak that contaminated the drinking water of almost 93, or actually over 93,000 people. And one phase of that cleanup was in 2024, but there is still so much left to go. And the resistance against that has been a huge part of general fight for sovereignty in Hawaii and of environmental fight. It's one place where environmental movements and movements against militarism have merged, because the reasons for it are absolutely obvious. And there's been a long-standing fight to close Red Hill because of this. And of course, the military still occupies thousands of acres of stolen land in Hawaii and conducts training exercises. There's a push for war with China with some of these, and bases in that are also part of training exercises in places that we occupy, like Puerto Rico. But not every country, or not every base, is able to be cleaned up by the country that it's in. We have around 60 in Korea, and there's been similar leaks. But because every base in the world is a tiny piece of US territory, and the US military is one of the world's largest single holders of active land in the world, when there's been jet fuel leakages in the Korean Peninsula, for instance, there hasn't actually been able to be cleanup from any of that, because they don't have control over that. But it, of course, affects their sovereignty still. Jody, you wanted to continue.
Do you want me to finish from there?
Yeah, you can go for it.
Okay. The part where it's actually unfathomable. We're talking about some numbers, and we're talking about specific things we can all have relationship to, but I want to quickly just go into like the unfathomability of it. So first, let's talk about the direct damage from conflict, the massive pollution, the use of bombs and missiles and other munitions that release massive amounts of toxins into the environment. The explosives contain heavy metals, white phosphorus, depleted uranium, will contaminate the soil, water, and air for decades. Destruction of ecosystems. The use of explosive weapons in urban areas, like we have seen in Gaza, creates millions of tons of rubble, which contain hazardous materials like asbestos and industrial chemicals. And in rural areas, the bombing creates craters, disrupts drainage patterns, and degrades soil quality, and makes the land unsuitable for agriculture for years. Then there's environmental terrorism, deliberate attacks on industrial sites, oil fields, and water infrastructure that cause catastrophic pollution. For example, the 1991 Gulf War saw hundreds of oil wells set on fire, releasing up to 500 metric tons of pollutants into the atmosphere daily. And then let's just look recently at the Nord Stream oil pipeline that was blown up by the United States. That cost of that, unfathomable. You can't measure these things. Unexploded ordinances. I mean, landmines, unexploded bombs. We see this in all, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. They're still using them in Ukraine. We are sending things that we were made illegal decades ago, that people got Nobel Peace Prizes for getting rid of, and we're still using them, these crimes against humanity. But then there's the indirect and long-term effects. With military emissions, we are talking about greenhouse gas emissions that it's, as you'll see with Aaron's number, that, it's just like bigger than anything that's happening. But also the resource depletion. Military activities consume vast amounts of resources. I mean, we're always protesting these military drills that are happening in pristine ecosystems in the ocean, where they're using up the planet to flex their muscle at another country to show them how much junk they have. the global militaries use more aluminum, copper, and platinum than the entire of the developing nations. The habitat destruction that happens with these military training exercise of these establishment of bases, bases are a crime. The consumption of land and destruction of really the scorched earth tactics and deforestation that just happens from not even war, but pre-war. And pre-war leads to a war, just remembering that, that if you're getting ready for a war, the war is usually inevitable. The biodiversity loss already is insane, but the chemical biological weapons legacy, these uses of chemical agents that, back in the Vietnam War were made illegal, there's still multi-generational consequences. We still see the birth defects. I have a friend staying with me right now who has one of those children. The residue of these chemicals and the PFAS that Erin just spoke about, it's forever. So, grappling with what this War is Not Green is about, it's unfathomable. And now Erin's going to try to give you numbers to make it concrete.
I'm going to give you numbers, but I'm going to just give one sort of story first. And if you've heard me talk about this before in other War is Not Green webinars or in the mini summit that we did 2 weeks ago that I encourage everyone to watch the recording of, which I learned so much from, I always talk about Vieques when I talk about multi-sectoral struggle, which is what we're trying to get to. And I always talk about it because I learned about it when I was actually at a summer camp that I grew up in that has a long history, but does some political education as part of its programming. And I, as part of a sort of camp-wide event and educational and sports and arts event, I had to learn about the story of Vieques and the story to evict the US Navy. And I had to teach it to teenagers and some young adults to have them teach it to younger campers who are around 9 to 14. And when you explain imperialism to that age range, you really need to break down what it's about. And like so many struggles for sovereignty, people get very fast and understand that it's about life and that it's about the right to live, about good health for the ecosystem, for people, for economies, and it's about sovereignty. And with Vieques, that it's because it really closely exhibits the overall colonial status of Puerto Rico, and that is incredibly clear in Vieques. And so for a lot of these campers, they very clearly saw it as an issue, as all of these issues combined, as an environmental struggle, as a struggle against militarism, as a struggle for health, for Puerto Rican self-determination, and for overall struggle for liberation. And so I repeat it all the time because it really clearly exhibits all of this and shows what can happen when all of these sectors come together. And by the end of all of this, these campers in elementary school and middle school were doing a puppet show, and they understood the US Navy as that it would make sense to depict it as a poisonous snake. And so I think, if these campers are able to understand it, I think it should be really clear as day for the rest of us as well, and for environmental movements at large. And so the struggle for Vieques is an island off the coast of Puerto Rico that was acquired in 1941 by the US Navy. And prior to 1941, it was an exploited site of sugar production owned by wealthy landlords. The US bought it from a lot of them and displaced a lot of the population to a smaller part of the island. And so for 60 years, it was a bomb testing site. So many of these bombs would later go on to be used on Palestine. And that became a big part of what the movement would talk about. In 1999, an off-target bomb killed Daniel Santos Rodriguez, who was a civilian employee. And that sparked mass protests with a huge diversity of tactics, of encampments, of art, and it brought together religious leaders, fishers, environmental activists, labor leaders. For a lot of folks in the independence movement, it was a huge part of the independence movement, but it also actually brought together folks advocating for statehood and Commonwealth status as well, but is a huge part of the struggle for Puerto Rican independence as well. And it closed in 2003. The Navy has still not completed its full cleanup, but the statistics around cancer rates there are horrific, around 250% more likely for lung cancer than the mainland. For women, and for men, it's very close to that as well. Overall, a much higher cancer rate. And so it's been very clear, but it also shows what a moment of winning can look like. And so, we can see this across all struggles for liberation and global South movements, where so often, the fight for land sovereignty is very clearly the struggle against militarism. Indigenous organizers in the US have clearly stated this. The Red Nation has a book called The Red Deal, where they talk about decolonization or extinction, and that it includes standing against militarism, land back, treaties. Struggles in Palestine have always been land-based. I'll talk about this in a second. And more, the overlap is clear. And it's clear that, we need to follow the lead of all struggles that have brought these together. Jody pretty much already talked about this, but numbers do unfortunately matter. And so I'm about to give a lot of them. And I know we are running a little behind time. And so I'll try to move through them on the quicker side. But I think, these can be really helpful to keep in mind when we're talking about this movement building and just for understanding a little bit of the scope. So once again, the US military is the #1 institutional polluter in the world. It would be the 47th largest emitter if it was a country. Between 2001 and 2017, the war on terror emitted over 1.2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. That would be 257 million passenger cars. We have around 25 million in the US right now. And so huge on its own, but of course that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface the more you unravel. The Pentagon, has dozens of contracts with the largest weapons contractors in the world who are invested in companies like BlackRock, that are invested in fossil fuels, or BlackRock invests in them. We sell weapons to NATO, which just had a funding increase and the emissions of those have been calculated to be roughly around the size of Argentina. And so the more and more you unravel it, the proxy wars, the violence that's provoked from our interventions, explosions, it's really just incomprehensible. Of course, we can understand the local toll of this ecocide and the complete destruction of Gaza over the past 2 years, where almost all vegetation has been destroyed, water wells have been polluted. There's been a rise of miscarriages and birth defects from what's happened to the air quality and the heavy metals that have been burned into the soil. And of course, Palestinians have been fighting for land sovereignty for a long time against greenwashing and the planting of non-native pine trees that decreased biodiversity across the land, of bulldozing olive groves for new settlements and for bases in some cases. And so, of course, Palestine has always understood the struggle for land to be the struggle against colonialism. And in addition to the ecocide being inflicted, which destroys agriculture and will for decades, the genocide has also emitted more than 100 countries at this point, or as of the first 15 months. And of course, that will come back to the most marginalized around the world, to Palestinians who won't have, who'll still be rebuilding shelter, and will be poisoning the atmosphere. You can also look at examples like the Philippines, where we have a webinar. For the sake of time, I'm not going to get into it as much right now, but a representative from Anak Bayan USA articulated the destruction of basic livelihood in agriculture that has been inflicted by the US's attempt to use it as a stepping stone against China and North Korea. And so to close and sort of talk a little bit about next week, before we get into the last section of what we're talking about, and a little clip from a recorded guest who is Abby Martin. We're trying to shine a light on all of this, and we're doing it because we're trying to build a movement, and a movement that's for life in all of its forms. And we need to not only get and become a large movement when fascism and empire is lashing out, but we also need to know who's going to fight with us. And we need to bring together the resources of an environmental movement that is incredibly well organized and has so many people doing so much incredible work. And we're making so much progress with this, especially, which is great to see leading up to the UN Climate Conference in November. But we also need to see, look at where some of the money is. And we have over 100 organizations that have signed onto a letter, an open letter that really details just the very bare minimum that we need to understand the cost of war and what it does to the planet and locally. But we still need more. And so we've launched the Elephant in the Room campaign, which looks at the 12 largest environmental organizations and the 12 most influential environmental organizations in our loose determinations, and some of the ones that are the most well-funded. And we're starting with, these aren't attacks, but they're invitations to these organizations to really join the movement and also join so much of the rest of the climate movement that's already recognizing this. And so we're starting with an ask to the Sierra Club that's because the Sierra Club, is a very member-driven organization. We'll talk a little bit more about the strategy in the next session, but we're starting with an ask for them to spotlight this cost of war, sign on to the petition or our open letter if they want, and include this in some of their work with so much of the organization's already doing. The Sierra Club Hawaii's been a big part of resisting the ongoing occupation there. Of course, the entire nation is occupied, but our ask for next week in preparation for some of this is not only to sign our petition to the Sierra Club and sign on to our open letter, but also sign up for their mailing list. See sort of where we can connect with members and local chapters, see what some of the, where their narrative is and what's being pointed out, and see sort of where we can intervene a little bit. And so I'll pass it back to Jody to give any more thoughts. And I know we're running a little short on time, but talk a little bit about Earth's Greatest Enemy.
Well, great. I think I'm going to just let Abby talk about it if you want to share Abby's film. Abby learned a lot from the work that we were doing, and we were going to COP, and she came to COP with us and started Earth's Greatest Enemy, which is her latest film that exposes a lot of what we've said and takes it from these numbers and us talking about it to those talking about it who are mostly deeply affected, and a little bit of looking at the insanity of the leadership and how they deny it. So I'll let Abby do that. And just, the homework for next week is if you can reach out and sign up to your local Sierra Club, we'll give you more to do with that next week. Abby's showing her film in San Diego tonight, so couldn't join us live right now. She's introducing it in San Diego. So here she is.
Hi, fellow Code Pink warriors, Abby Martin here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Earth's Greatest Enemy, the new film that Jody is EP on, executive producer. So it's a film that I think all of you will be very interested in. It's a film about the US military's impact on the environment. My husband, who's an Iraq War veteran, Mike Preisner, and I embarked on this adventure 4.5 years ago, diving into just the climate emissions that are uncounted and endless from the US military. We hear that statistic that the US military is the largest polluter in the world on an institutional level. But when you dig into that statistic, it means just the oil purchases alone per day, which is 270,000 barrels of oil every single day that the Pentagon's purchasing. But then when you dig into that and kind of extrapolate it all out, you realize that the emissions are completely incalculable, because it just continues to go on with life supply and supply chain and life cycle, and then it just becomes the application of these weaponry and the maintenance of the arsenal, the chemicals, the toxic dumping. So once we dug into the subject matter, we realized that every stone unturned is another documentary subject. So instead of making 20 documentaries or an endless docu-series, we wanted to put a one-stop shop, make it at the totality of military pollution. So the climate emissions are just a small portion of it. And we go into toxic dumping, indigenous, habitat destruction, indigenous fighting back in Okinawa and Hawaii. It's an incredible journey. And the whole intention of making this, you guys, was for the movement. We could have sat on this film for a year and put it through film festivals and tried to get accolades and pats on the back and laurels and all that stuff. And we understand that truth telling has never been more dire or urgent right now. And this movie is a tool for us. It's a tool to activate the masses. It is meant to coalesce our movements. The entire initiative and effort is an activist tool to generate and catalyze activism from the environmentalist movement, from liberals. I mean, people who care about the environment. This is for them. This is for them, to motivate them to link our struggles together. The movie covers policing, it covers immigration, it covers, it covers war and the environment. And so I think everyone can understand that all of these issues are linked, and that's what this movie is really doing. And I'm so thrilled, you guys. The reception has been incredible so far. I've been on a tour across college campuses, and it's just unbelievable to see kids motivated, saying, what can I do? I didn't know any of this stuff. I'm ready to go. I mean, I had kids coming up to me a couple days ago saying, I want to do this now. Like, for the rest of my life, I want to do this. So I just think that this is an incredible moment. We're at the precipice of something that can be cataclysmic in terms of our collective action and change. And people are radicalized and realizing that there's no hope within the two-party duopoly. And so this is our moment. This is our moment for intervention. This is our moment for education. This is our moment to get out there and get this movie seen. It is for us. It is for you. It is for the world. It is for saving the planet, you guys. I hope everyone can get on board, help us get it seen, help us get it toured, and help us bring all of these movements together to unite, to fight back against the military-industrial complex, against the beast that is U.S. imperialism. Much love, you guys. Check out earthsgreatestenemy.com. We're going all around the country, hopefully all around the world after that, but we need your help. We need your help. This is a huge grassroots effort. This is not going to be on Netflix. This is not going to be seen on demand or have a mainstream media movie tour. This is going to be all the effort of you and me and activists to get this seen. I can't wait to hear what you guys think. I can't wait to meet you on the tour. Keep fighting the good fight. Much love.
Yay, Abby. So I think that's a great place to end today, because next week we're going to give you the tools to engage. And I hope we can put in, she said Earth's Greatest Enemy. Look it up if you want to find out when it's near you. Again, if you're on a college campus, you can make it happen or organize something to show it to your community. But it's an amazing tool, given like all that we just said. She turns it into a film that, you cry through, you learn through, and that inspires you. So we hope to see you next week, because we have ways for you. This was the Educate. We hope that that was inspiring. And next week is about how to activate and engage locally, because there's the Sierra Club near all of us. I see there's some questions about what are the other organizations that aren't on the list. So if you just look at the list that was put, Environmentalists Unite, if you see there, then you'll see what's there, and then you can see who's missing. Please, yes, engage with whatever, send a letter to whoever you're engaged with as a climate organization. Please, ask all your friends to engage too. And Erin, thanks for making us smarter and giving us all these tools. And we look forward to having everyone with us next week again. finishing just on time. Thanks, Grace, for taking care of us. And thanks all of you for being brilliant, amazing peace activists.